All right, welcome everyone to the second general meeting for UMN Energy Club. It's great to have you tonight. If you haven't already signed in, the sign-in link is here. Just a few announcements. And to start with, just so you know, just so everyone knows, this meeting is being recorded. We'd like to post this recording online so that people who aren't able to attend our meetings, at the scheduled time can watch them later. And up to you, you can either leave your video on or mute it or use a virtual background if you'd like. If you have any concerns, please feel free to reach out to us at umnec@umn.edu. Okay, a few announcements. First, stuff organized by our events directors, Kat and Nolan. There's some volunteering events. The first one is not this coming Saturday, but the next Saturday. So if you're interested in this upcoming tree planting or the two that are happening later this semester, the sign-up form is z.umn.edu/F20EC. Also, just in case, you should be able to see closed captioning on the video. So in case you can't see it, let me know in the chat and we can try and work that out. Also, we're working on organizing tours for the semester. So let us know when you're free. And then Kat and Nolan can find the best day and time of the week to get those scheduled. Next up, the Center for Spirituality and Health has a well-being series for Planet Earth lecture series. It's in 3 parts. The first part is tomorrow evening. And then there are 2 more parts happening later this month and early next month. So if you're interested in those, please sign up on their website. And the Institute on the Environment is hosting their annual meeting next Friday from 9:30 in the morning to 3 p.m. Central Time. There's a whole bunch of breakout sessions, and you can register here. It's free for everybody. So if you're interested, I would encourage you to go to that. Also, there's a lot of stuff about intersections between social and environmental justice, and of course this ties into our work in sustainability also. Finally, the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education has their 2020 virtual conference. It's free for UMN students thanks to work by the Institute on the Environment. So if you use this institution code and use your UMN email address to register, then you can register at no cost. I have never been to this event, but I'm really excited, and I'll probably be attending part of the earlier sessions. So if you're interested, I encourage you to go to that as well. So our speaker for today, for the speaker series to kick it off for the school year, is Shane Stennes, who is the Director of Sustainability for the University of Minnesota. His work includes leading climate action for the Twin Cities campus. And over the past decade, he's reduced campus emissions by almost 40% and has a goal to reduce emissions by half by 2021 on the way to carbon neutrality by 2050. Prior to becoming director of the office in 2015, he held a variety of positions, including Chief Administrative Officer for the Facilities Management Department, Sustainability Coordinator, and an HR professional. He has a BA in Political Science and International Relations from St. John's University and the College of St. Benedict, and a Master of Human Resources degree from the University of South Carolina. I'll hand it over to Shane and take it away.
Thanks, Vijay. Appreciate that and appreciate being here tonight. I am gonna turn on screen sharing and put up some slides just to kind of help me along. So bear with me 1 second while I do that. And I'm using my wife's 2-screen setup, which as always perplexes me. So let's see if I can do it without breaking it. There we go. And feel free to interrupt me with any questions you have as we go throughout. I'm happy to answer stuff as we go. You don't need to wait till the end to jump in. So, and I think what I'll do is I'll start by talking a little bit about the office and some of the stuff that we do, and then kind of segue into some more specific content around energy at the university. But we can certainly talk about any topic related to sustainability in the university you're interested in, or frankly, any topic related to sustainability outside the university you're interested in, because I tend to dabble more outside the U these days than I do inside it some days, it seems like. And one of the things I thought I'd start with is, kind of foundationally, the university has a sustainability policy, and I'm not sure how many students are aware of that because that's not always super transparent. So it's one of the things I'd just like to point out right up front is that the Board of Regents, which is like the governing board for the university, think about it like a city council or a corporate board, they oversee the university and set policy for the institution and make sort of very high level budgetary decisions, as well as hire the president and hire other senior executive leaders. And in 2004, they had adopted a policy on sustainability and energy efficiency. The policy title actually is Sustainability and Energy Efficiency. So energy is really at its core. And it's really kind of a classical definition of sustainability, and it's focused on the collective efforts of the institution to make the university campus more sustainable, and really sees that as a continuous effort and not something that you just do and then is done, but is rather as a journey along the way. Within that policy, it really talks about sustainability and all the university's core functions. So teaching and research, which you experience as students or as undergraduate or graduate researchers, but also the outreach mission of the institution. This is the part of the university that goes out into communities and helps communities solve their problems by applying research and expertise. And then also in the operations, and that's actually the part that I'm going to focus on today, is that last piece of it, which is sustainability and operations, which is where I spend probably 80% of my time in terms of my role and the things that the university asks me to focus on, which is really how do we advance and incorporate sustainability into the operation of the campus. Oops. I'll go back one. So, and then within that operations space, we've identified 4 sustainability priorities. Clean energy, which is what we'll talk about most tonight, but just real quickly, the other 3 are materials management, which is really what do we buy, and then how do we dispose of things at the end of their useful life? So do we recycle more? Do we reuse more? Do we repurpose more? Water stewardship. So, with the university being right along the banks of the Mississippi River, we have a real strong relationship with the Mississippi River and with the water shed that it flows into, which covers a large swath of the United States. And being at the headwaters or near the headwaters of the Mississippi, feel like we have a special role in terms of keeping that river clean and protecting the integrity of that water, along with also just water, kind of standard water conservation and water efficiency work. Food systems, which really pertains to what do we feed students and employees in the university's dining facilities and cafeterias and residence halls, and really focused on how do we buy from more sustainable producers, farmers, growers, and ensure that we're, kind of when we're spending money on your behalf to buy food and then serve that to you, that it's coming from growers who are practicing ethical standards, raising animals in a humane way, or using organic or less impactful environmental practices in terms of how they produce that food. On the clean energy side, which is obviously what you're focused on as a club, and what I'm going to talk most about tonight, really kind of boils down into 2 real big buckets. What is the energy that we consume on the campus, predominantly in our buildings and our built environment? And then in terms of where does that come from? How do we source it? And then also, how do we use that energy in the most efficient way possible? How do we make sure that we're getting as much useful work out of energy and the energy inputs the campus uses, and being super efficient with that energy? So that's really, when we talk about clean energy, what we're focused on. And the way that we principally measure that, or the way that I measured it from a sustainability standpoint, it comes down to carbon emissions as a campus, and really thinking about carbon emissions and energy intensity per square foot of campus space, or energy intensity and other normalized metrics like things like research productivity, or how many students we teach or how many students we graduate. We do that in a really lean way, especially for a university of our size. We have 3 full-time staff, myself and 2 other staff, a sustainability coordinator, Carly Rice, and a sustainability communications associate, Hannah Lauber. The 3 of us work to basically integrate sustainability into everything that the university does in that operational space. We generally hire about 2 to 4 students that work part-time with us during the semester and sometimes full-time in the summer. And then we work a lot with people who are staff in various parts of the university, might be in the energy management department, could be in parking and transportation services, who do sustainability as part of their role, but it's not their core function. The other way that we work, and in terms of kind of how we think about our broader concept of a sustainability team, is lots of multiple class-based internships and teams and project teams and programs. So we work a lot with faculty who are looking for opportunities for students to get experience through class projects as a team or through dedicated internships. And so we play and serve as a host for a lot of those programs and opportunities that are coming out of your classes that you might be taking. And then the final piece is sustainability is a team effort, right? It's a group effort, and it requires the kind of collective contributions of everyone at the university, everyone at the institution. So we really rely on every student, every employee participating in and being engaged in the work of sustainability, and recognizing that that happens at different levels and in lots of different ways for different people. But we really embrace this idea that we want to engage the entire campus community in that work, which is, sort of brings us to one of our core functions, which is that communications and engagement piece. And you've seen it as the It All Adds Up campaign, probably around campus, light switch stickers, posters, our website, our blogs, other different initiatives that we do. You now see it on all of the waste containers and waste stations around the campus. All the signage related to those has It All Adds Up on it. And it's really a mantra that we try to push and practice through our communications and engagement work to encourage people to take actions, no matter how small, that collectively add up to sort of big impacts at a campus of our size and our scale. In addition to that, we do a lot of work around strategic planning and goal setting, particularly with the University Services group, which is the group at the university, the department, if you will, that does all the operations functions, or a good chunk of them. So everyone from the custodians to the people who run the energy plants to the folks who build buildings and maintain them, we're working with that team on how they set goals, what goals they're setting, and how do we strategically undertake activities to advance those goals and those objectives. Do a lot of assessment. We coordinate governance across the university. So how does the university make decisions in this space? And then the two parts that I think probably are the most fun of our job is, one, we lead programs where where it's kind of, how would I describe it? Very multidisciplinary. So things where it's not clearly the responsibility of just one department at the university, but involves lots of different stakeholders. We play a role in facilitating those and managing or leading those programs. And we can talk about some examples later about things that we've done that in. And then the other one is we sort of play a role as and it's kind of an odd thing to be at a university, but like an internal think tank where we're pushing the envelope for operations and working on new ideas and new thinking about how we might advance some of these ambitious goals that we have institutionally. And so part of our role is to be championing ideas that might be on the leading edge of practice and thinking about how do we make those viable at scale of an institution our size. One of the reasons, I talked about clean energy is one of our focus areas in terms of sustainability and in terms of the things we're working on operationally. One reason is because energy really makes it possible. Without reliable, cost-effective, and sustainable energy, there is no way the university could accomplish all the work that it does. It is fundamental and sort of basic and necessary to everything that we do. So whether it's the teaching that we do and the degrees we award and the students we graduate, or the tremendous amount of research that we undertake every year at the institution, without reliable energy and without energy services that meet the needs of all your professors, all of you, all the academic buildings you're in, there's just no way we could get it done. So at the core, energy is essential, right? It's an essential service. And the way that we think about that is there's a lot of different kind of sources and methods of delivery for energy at the institution when it comes to the built environment, the buildings that we live in and occupy. But it really boils down to a handful of things. I mean, obviously electricity for powering equipment, lights, process loads, those sorts of things. And we get that in a mix of ways, partly from the utility, partly from Xcel Energy, and partly from our own self-generation. And that self-generation is both in the form of combined heat and power, which I know the group has toured before and has thought about or talked about touring again, but also through a lot of renewable energy sources on campus and off campus now. We also produce steam or hot water for heating buildings and also for a number of process load functions, including production of chilled water, but also process loads in laboratory environments, use in autoclaves, you name it. We use steam in a lot of different applications. We use steam to generate electricity too, in some instances. And then chilled water is really a distribution vehicle. It's produced predominantly either from electricity or steam, but ultimately, we use it in a number of our buildings, not only for building ambient cooling, like keeping people comfortable, but again, for process loads, for data center cooling, for any number of other applications where a high quality cooling resource might be needed. Now, to put this in context, I wish I had an external context. That would be more helpful probably, but internally, I thought it would be helpful to give a sense of like who the 800-pound gorilla is in the room if it's not already obvious within the University of Minnesota system. So this is a chart there, a table that shows campus energy use by the 5 campuses in the U of M system. And sort of the collective thing that you can take away from this is combined, Crookston, Duluth, Morris, and Rochester are a fraction of the size of the entire Twin Cities campus. The Twin Cities campus is just, simply put, one of the largest universities, not only in the state, but in the country, both in terms of square footage, in terms of number of students, and in terms of our energy consumption, partly driven by our size, certainly partly driven by the kinds of things that we do. We're one of the few institutions in the country that actually has the combination of things that we do, many of which are really energy intensive, like research labs and engineering, physics, biological sciences, but we also have a hospital, we have medical clinics, we have a law school, we have a business school, we have ag schools. There are very few places in the world that combine all the things that we have into one spot. I think the last stat I saw was something like 5 universities maybe in the country that have the combination of things that we do. And globally, I think it's not much more than a dozen. So it is a big place with a lot of breadth of activity, much of which is really energy intensive. But then the other piece is obviously we're in a cold climate, and with a cold climate and with extremes of really hot, humid summers and really cold winters, we also use a fair amount of energy, and that sort of climate impact and that weather impact really drives sort of our energy consumption footprint, particularly relative to our peers who might be in more temperate climates or even warmer climates where the energy consumption needs aren't nearly as extreme. I sort of alluded to this before, but in terms of how we approach that, we manage our energy resources in 3 ways or with 3 guiding principles in mind. First, it's got to be cost effective, both in the near term and the longer term. So we really focus on how do we be good stewards of the taxpayer dollars that support the university and the tuition payer dollars. All of you pay tuition. We want to be responsible with the expenditure of that money, but we also recognize that sometimes you trade off investments that might have long-term payoff for maybe some short-term pain. So we sort of balance those and try to figure out ways to effectively and constructively think about those. Reliability is really critical at the university because of our research operations and our clinical operations. We can not afford power disruptions or energy disruptions really of any kind. And so we really pride ourselves on highly reliable services that can function 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And that's not just a mantra. That's actually, and it's not marketing. It's actually essential and required in a core imperative. And then sustainable. And really, kind of thinking about not only environmental sustainability, but equity as well. How do we do this in a way that is environmentally responsible and also equitable to the communities around us that border and are adjacent to the university and those communities that we purchase energy resources from. So I just want to talk a little bit about how we apply those principles to the energy system and sort of how we balance that. But before I jump into that, any questions about anything I've said so far? It'll give me a chance to get a drink of water while you're thinking about that too. Not seeing any, so I can keep going. If there's something that comes to mind for you, let me know. Or Vijay, if some.
Quick question, Shane.
Yeah, go ahead.
How much of the energy that's used by our campus is used in heating and cooling campus buildings versus in the dorms, or just like buildings in general versus like other kinds of like electrical energy, for example?
Yeah, let me see if this answers your question. I don't remember off the top of my head how much what the split is between residence halls and like academic buildings versus clinical operations. Maybe one useful stat would be to tell you that about rough numbers, about 30% of our space is research facilities, but they're responsible for about 60% of our energy consumption, research and clinical, roughly. So they're relatively energy intensive. Our top 25 buildings are really disproportionate sized consumers of utility services, just because of not only their size, but the kinds of things they host. So think about south of Washington Avenue in the medical complex, the Phillips Wagenstein building is huge. The Mayo building is almost 1 million square feet. And the total campus is about 24 million square feet. So it gives you a sense of scale. Those buildings, because of their size and because of the kinds of activity they have in them, tend to be more energy consumptive than, say, what would be a good example? Like Nicholson Hall or Rapson, right? Where it's, more of a teaching environment or a teaching classroom. Wiley Hall in the West Bank would be another good example. Highly classroom based, the energy loads there are much smaller than they are, say, for research facilities. So our utility services and the numbers I showed earlier, that's really just for campus, that's campus buildings. So that's residence halls the university owns, and anywhere we're supplying utility services, whether that might be a standalone building or something that's connected to our district energy facility. Those are both in those numbers, as long as it's a university owned facility. So.
Sure. And one more thing, just out of curiosity, has campus energy consumption dropped in the past couple of weeks or so relative to the start of a usual semester because of all of the changes because of the pandemic? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, we did undertake steps, and I don't know where we ended up in terms I don't have the numbers readily available, but we did take steps to reduce energy services to buildings that were unoccupied, particularly because of COVID, and that occupancy level even shrunk further. Always shrinks during the summer months, right? And so consequently, we were able to change building protocols and schedules for buildings that were unoccupied to save energy during this sort of period where the university was in a reduced operations mode. As we've ramped back up, though, I think we're going to see sort of an increase in energy consumption, because in order to provide a safe environment for people, we've increased the number of outdoor air changes and air rates where we've been able to, where the equipment enables that, and that's possible technically within the buildings. And so that, that increased airflow from outside is going to result in increased energy consumption, because that's more air and understandably so, it's the right thing to do. But from an energy perspective, it's a trade-off, right? So in order to ensure safety, we're going to pump more air in through a building. Yep. And then we're going to have to heat and cool and humidify or dehumidify that air depending on the exterior conditions.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right. So just kind of real high level, some of the ways that we apply those principles of cost effectiveness, reliability, and sustainability. I'm going to talk about both sort of the energy efficiency side of things, and then I'm going to segue into the production side or the procurement side of how do we get our energy, or where does it come from. So the first way that we can really be cost effective, sustainable, and reliable is reducing the number of kilowatt hours or the number of pounds of steam we need in a given year. I think Amory Lovins from the Rocky Mountain Institute called this, negawatts, this idea of negative kilowatts. And so we really practice that a lot through a lot of different ways. Part of it is building it right. So how do we design buildings in ways that are more energy efficient? And when we're first constructing them, build them to a high energy standard. So in that space, we follow the state of Minnesota Sustainable Building Guidelines called B3. And in that B3 program is nested this little thing called SB 2030, which is the state's sustainability guideline, which if you want to get really wonky into the weeds is based off of a thing called Architecture 2030, which is an idea that you will continue to set more ambitious targets for yourself every few years until you get to a point where your buildings that you're constructing by 2030 are net zero. So that's the path that we're on right now. That doesn't mean our buildings today are net zero, but it does mean that the buildings that we're building today are considerably more energy efficient than they would have been, say, 5 years ago, or certainly 10 years ago. So that's a big part of it. The second way that we really save energy is just maintaining equipment. Buildings are energy intensive things to run and operate. And if you don't maintain them properly and they start to degrade, sort of like think about like a car. And you take your car in to get tuned up if you have a car, or you take your bicycle in to get tuned up if you have a bike. And if you don't do that, it starts to fall apart and starts to not work as well. And if it's a car, it starts to be less fuel efficient. And if it's a bike, you have to work a lot harder to pedal it, right? Same thing happens with a building. After a while, parts start to break, things degrade. The building starts getting used in ways that were not originally intended or anticipated when it was designed. And so there's a mismatch between how much energy is being supplied and how much energy really needs to be used in order to support the function. And so a lot of what we do is that preventative maintenance side, just to make sure that buildings are operating optimally. I will say that this is probably the one area where we struggle the most with, because the university is such a big place. And historically, we haven't gotten the level of funding that we've needed from the state in order to make sure we can keep up with that maintenance stuff. And so this is part of what we routinely ask the legislature for funding for, is to try catch up on some of that backlog, which is pretty significant. The last thing is, this idea of optimizing and improving. And how do we go into buildings that are already built and have been in existence for a while and either commission them, recommission them, which is a process where you go in and tune up that building, kind of that same car analogy, or continuous commissioning, or doing targeted energy conservation opportunities. So on the commissioning and recommissioning side, commissioning, just the only sort of nuance here is commissioning is for new buildings. This is when we build something brand new and we go into the building, and what we do is we commission or program and ensure that the building's automation systems, its mechanical systems are running as designed, or as they should be. Sometimes we find that the design isn't necessarily actually what the building needs, and so we modify. Recommissioning is a process where we go into an existing building and we basically give it a tune-up, sort of same model as that kind of car analogy. And we do this with a number of buildings every year. We used to shoot for about 5% of the university's square footage. That turned out to be a really ambitious goal. So what we try to do is undertake this in a handful of buildings per year, where we're doing a full recommissioning and going through the suite of building systems and services to give them a complete overhaul, because it's a fairly labor-intensive process. One of the other tools that we've started to use more often is something called fault detection diagnostics. I'm not sure if any of you come across this in classes or in external work experiences, but FDD is basically as a colleague of mine likes to describe it, he's like, it's the computers watching the computers. So what it does is it overlays a computer system to look for faults or errors in the building's automation system, where the building automation system says the building should be doing X right now, and it's not, something's wrong. And so then it sends alerts to humans, and then the humans can basically investigate that and then determine if the error was a false positive or if it actually needs some attention from some sort of field staff or technician. So a classic example of this might be, you might have a sensor on a valve that's feeding a fan coil unit or an air handler, and the valve, because it's nighttime, should be closed, and the air handler's volume should be reduced via variable speed drive. And the fault detection system might say, oh, actually that valve is open when it should be closed, and the air handler is running at full tilt. And that seems wrong. you should send someone to go look at it. And so then we're able to either diagnose electronically via a variety of building automation computer tools, or we might actually have to go send someone out in the field to figure out what's happening. Sometimes it's intentional. Sometimes we've overridden the program because we have, let's say, Keller Hall has a late night program going on, and so we're ventilating a auditorium space because there's going to be 700 people in there. That might be a really legitimate one where it was intentionally done. Other cases you might have where, you know, someone turned on their handler for a maintenance routine and then forgot to turn it back off when they were done with it. So what FDD does is it sort of overlays a computer system to help catch some of these things and provide some intelligence to the operators of the building to give them some data that further enhances their capabilities to really drive energy efficiency. One of the ways that you'll see this described in trade journals and stuff is the process of continuous commissioning. So sort of ongoing commissioning rather than this idea of periodic recommissioning. You're constantly evaluating the building to make sure it's performing at its optimal level. Energy conservation is a big part of the way that we accomplish some of the work of energy stewardship and clean energy at the university. It stems from a lot of different things. Could be ventilation improvements. We do a fair amount of that. Building control upgrades are a big thing, moving from antiquated analog systems or systems that are run off of actuators and compressed air to stuff that uses digital demand controls. We do this thing called Smart Labs, which we'll talk about in a minute, which is really focused on that research space where that's a really big user of research of energy, and how do we bend the curve on the energy consumption in those spaces. And then you've probably seen on campus a lot of LED, or maybe you haven't. If they do it well, you don't see it at all. But a lot of LED lighting retrofits. So we have been in the process of retrofitting a good chunk of the campus with LEDs over the course of the last several years. We started with stairwells. Fun fact, stairwells were lit 100% of the time, but they were occupied 2% of the time. So we said that would be a really great way to save some energy. So we've implemented bi-level stairwell lighting in almost all stairwells on campus. There's a few exceptions, but almost all. And really cut down and saved energy in those spaces. And then we moved on to parking facilities and doing a lot of complete retrofits of parking lighting in ramps, garages, parking lots, from high pressure sodium lights to LEDs. And again, sort of deploying advanced control strategies in some of those instances where we have photometric sensors, or we might have a mix of photometric and motion sensors, particularly in ramps and garages, further cutting down energy consumption in those facilities. And now we're into classrooms and in libraries and public areas. And so our energy management team, which is it's about 130 employees in total, they just kind of chip away at this, continually going through the campus. It's a big campus though. It's 24 million square feet. So it's taking time to get through that whole opportunity. The chart on the right actually shows, it's just a kind of a typical graph. Actually, I think this one's from Walter, where they, looked at amperage draw, the lighting, the energy savings, pre and post retrofit. So you can kind of see there's a real significant reduction in amps. And then of course, in the corresponding amount of power and energy that's required. So. Smart Labs I mentioned. So this is a program where we're going into, and it's pretty new. We've been working on it for a long time, but we're actually just starting to get some traction with it, where we're actually going into buildings that are research facilities and determining whether those facilities can be operated and function differently from an energy standpoint. The primary driver for energy consumption in laboratory environments is the ventilation required. So most labs had been designed in the past and by code are required to deliver a minimum of 6 air changes per hour. So that's 6 air changes of outdoor air, fresh air, every 5 minutes, a whole brand new volume of air coming into the building, being heated or cooled. And in Minnesota in January, that's a lot of energy to put into heating it and humidifying it. And then pushed through the lab to be used for 5 minutes and then vented out again. And so that's really, the science that's evolved around environmental health and safety and industrial hygiene really has demonstrated that actually probably is not, one, an effective approach for ensuring safety. There are more effective approaches. and two, that there's opportunities to reduce that in intelligent ways and to think really strategically about it. So what we're doing is embarking on a program that involves a kind of complex conversation between our building codes folks, our industrial hygienists, basically the people who keep researchers safe, and ensure safety in lab environments, and energy management in our capital projects group, to figure out where we can do this, and then how do we go about doing it in a way that enhances safety and saves energy at the same time. So the building on the right is microbiology research facility. Was actually one of the first where we did this in. We have a system in there that's called Aircuity that continuously draws samples of air from the laboratory environments, looks for certain compounds in those samples, mainly VOCs, particulate matter. I think in that building we might have some CO2 sensors, and potentially, I could think about what else is in there. I feel like there's one other sensor suite in there that I'm forgetting. But it's sampling this air and then measuring it against an analytical data set. And then if the sensor suite determines that there's a concentration of a compound in the air that might be concerning, it ramps up the ventilation temporarily until that contaminant is cleared. So there's always ventilation flowing through there, but it modulates how much based on what it actually senses in the air, and uses sort of real-time intelligence around that. That's one application or one approach about how we're doing this. There's a few other techniques that are in our toolkit, but it's an exciting opportunity because, again, that space is only about 30% of our square footage, but it's about 60% of our energy consumption. And so if we can do something meaningful in terms of reducing the energy consumption in our research environments while still keeping people safe, that can really advance broader environmental safety in terms of climate change and other impacts as well. So something new that we've been working on.
I have another question, Shane.
Yeah, jump in. Go ahead.
I'm curious about, so like in certain, I'm sure there's certain microbiology labs or neuroscience labs, as well as certain chemistry labs that have, relatively small amounts, but particularly hazardous chemicals. So extreme acids, extreme bases, oxidizers, etc.
Yep.
How do you plan to manage those materials when kind of going into, for example, like Kolthoff Hall, where a lot of those labs have, decent amounts of these materials? Like, are they transported somewhere else? Is there like a backup generator that the hoods are put on while this is done? I'm just curious about how that would work.
Yeah, generally chemistry labs would probably be a poor candidate for most of the smart labs kind of approaches because of the hazards you just described. We mostly do this in biology-based facilities and life sciences facilities, which the university has a lot of. And unfortunately, the code doesn't distinguish between chemistry labs and life sciences labs, at least in the state of Minnesota. Other jurisdictions are different. And so that's one thing that we're looking at, or that's one sort of we have a screening protocol where we look at the building. Actually, we look at a lab basis, like lab by lab, we look at it, and determine whether it's even a candidate. And a lot of those things you highlighted in terms of chemistries that might be, extremely hazardous or hazardous in small amounts, or acutely hazardous in small amounts. We don't have a lot of those. We have some. Those would be disqualified for this kind of approach, but they might be subject to other kinds of approaches that maybe don't tackle the ventilation energy so much, but look for other opportunities like energy recovery through runaround loops, or might look for, opportunities to save in terms of plug loads or how we manage fume hoods. You can, move from constant volume systems to variable air volume systems that modulate based on the position of the sash and the hood. So there's a bunch of different strategies we can deploy, but that sensing suite that you talked about, or that I talked about, probably in a chemistry environment wouldn't be. And that's actually, you bring up a good point, is the chemistry ends up being a really primary screening tool in a way that it's the first cut. So chemistry can quickly disqualify, certain kinds of chemistry can quickly disqualify a lab. Then we also look at process. So how are the researchers using the compounds in their lab? And are those protocols that they're using particularly more hazardous or not relative to some benchmarks? So it's a mix of both the compounds being used and the process by which they're being used.
Got it.
So the main energy plant, I know the Energy Club's taken a tour of this before, and And this is our combined heat and power facility that we just brought online a couple of years ago. What it basically does is, we really looked at as part of we have a climate action plan. I should link to that. I'll send you a link after we're done. That the university adopted in 2011 and takes us through actually the end of this year and a little bit into the beginning of next year. But one of the things we identified in that climate action plan is the opportunity to reduce our consumption of coal, number one, and two, to move to combined heat and power as a way of dramatically reducing our footprint. And so we embarked on renovating the main energy plant and putting in, state-of-the-art modern cogeneration facility in there, basically where we use a jet turbine to burn natural gas. The turbine turns a generator, and then we use the waste heat from the turbine to create steam for campus uses. And dramatically increase the overall process efficiency of the system from what would be more conventional generation where you have a power plant separate from the boiler that might be providing the steam to campus. So this is a big part of our sort of near term, the climate action plan that we're in right now. And has been, operating for these last couple of years, and is, really makes a big dent in terms of both our carbon footprint, and it also changes the dynamics about how we get our electricity supplied to campus. It makes the university less dependent on Excel and more of a self-generating entity in terms of our electricity supply. So it doesn't completely sever our relationship with Excel, not by any means. We still buy a lot of electricity from Excel, but it really changed the dynamic a lot. We've been doing a lot more on the, kind of renewable energy side too over the course of the last few years. We are a subscriber to more than four. We have contracts with 4 different vendors for community solar. So this is offsite solar that's developed in a garden kind of model where there's multiple subscribers to a garden. So we have subscriptions to 4 suppliers, and I want to say it's more than 25 gardens individually. So spread around the metro area. And that's about equivalent. I think our contracted amounts are equivalent to around 22 megawatts. Not all of that is online yet, but most of it is. Then we also bought into this thing that Excel started doing a couple of years ago, which is called Renewable Connect, which is a mix of wind and solar for 100% of your energy needs for a certain portion. So we bought a portion of our electricity supply comes from this Renewable Connect program, which is basically 100% renewable resources for the portion that you subscribe to. And then I think, if you've been around the West Bank or you've been over to St. Paul, you've seen the solar development that we've done over the last couple of years, about 2 megawatts in total. The picture in the slide right now is the one over by the law school. And that's a little over 1 megawatt of installed capacity. It's actually, this picture is about halfway through the project because the roof that's black to the right actually has solar on it now too. So in that, that energy is being, directly consumed behind the meter and is supplying and supporting the university's energy needs directly in those buildings adjacent to that solar garden or that solar installation.
How much of a limitation is the distance from those gardens to the campus? Like, how do you choose which those gardens to subscribe to?
Yeah, so the requirement under the statute that created the community solar program is that you have to subscribe, or the enabling regulation, is that your garden has to be in the county that your property is located in, that's being serviced by Excel, or in the adjacent county. So we have operations in Ramsey and Hennepin, and so we can subscribe to gardens pretty much anywhere around the metro for the most part. So we have gardens in Sherburne County, which is, kind of goes all the way to St. Cloud. We have gardens that are in Carver, some in Dakota, some in Ramsey, a couple in Hennepin. I think about where else, a few in Washington County. So they're kind of spread out all over the place. And that's really our operating limitation. We're not the only U campus that has community solar. The Duluth campus also has some community solar. Minnesota Power has a program, and so they subscribe to their program as well. So we've used it in those 2 campuses. In on-site solar now, I think every campus except for Rochester has on-site solar at this point of some size. Crookston's is the smallest; they have 20 kW. Morris is quite a lot for their campuses their size. They've got, a 240 kilowatt system they just brought online, another 20. So they're probably, kind of approaching 300 kW of solar plus 2 wind turbines for another 3.2, 3.3 megawatts. So they've got a pretty significant, sizable campus generation. Duluth's got a mix of smaller, 20 to 40 kW systems spread here and there. So from a sustainability standpoint, this is the brass tacks for me. This is the part that I really get focused on and track a lot is, sort of what does this mean for our emissions, and how is all this work we're doing in the energy space positively or negatively impacting our greenhouse gas emissions? And I'm really happy to say that, over the course of the last 11 years, we've reduced our greenhouse gas footprint by 39%. And I think we are on track. We got a little waylaid by COVID and sort of what was going on campus, but I expect sometime in the next year we'll be able to bring this within that 50% reduction that we were targeting by 2021. And so we're really excited about this. This has predominantly come through work in the energy space, and it's really been because a couple things. One is, our greenhouse gas footprint in 2008 was over half purchased electricity. So half of our greenhouse gas footprint was coming from the electricity we bought from Excel. A third of it was coming from our campus steam plants. And the rest was kind of a mix of commuting and air travel and the university's vehicle fleet and a few other miscellaneous sources. Within a decade, we had really flipped that, though, where purchased electricity now as a share of the pie is really small. It's 15% of our footprint. But now, between shrinking that part of the pie and taking on more of our own electricity generation on campus, we've really increased how much that on-campus heating contributes to our greenhouse gas footprint. And that's really the big focal area going forward, and the thing that we have on our sites in terms of this is what's next. This is what is to work on. And frankly, this is the hard work that's really to come for not only the University of Minnesota, but for organizations around the globe. How do you heat, particularly in a cold climate, without using natural gas or some sort of fossil fuel, and doing so responsibly and in a way that's sustainable over the long term? So we're really starting to pivot and think about like what are the strategies we can use to reduce the greenhouse gas footprint in that on-campus heating. And then the other piece that this pie chart probably maybe raises a flag for some people on is how much the commuting and the air travel as a percentage of our overall emissions have grown since we've shrunk the rest. And there's a lot of truth to that. So we, despite living in an urban area, still have a pretty big commuting footprint from a greenhouse gas emissions standpoint as a state. Transportation as a sector overtook electricity generation as the leading contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in the state last year. And so that transportation piece, particularly light duty vehicle travel and medium duty trucks, is going to be, I think, a next big sort of wave of work for us in terms of thinking about how do we continue to address that and try to figure out ways that we can shrink that part of the pie and eventually get that to zero. So that's a big focus for us now. I just wanted to close by showing you one. I'm going to end slideshow. I want to show you actually the bottom link if you haven't seen it before. So recently we started to revamp our, bear with me here, our reporting for energy management, and got into a place where we can sort of better, sorry, this is being more difficult than I thought. Better display and better share information with the campus community about what's going on in terms of different activities on campus and how the energy systems are managed. So one of the things I wanted just to show you real quick is where you can access that if you're interested. So you should be seeing my web browser now. Just as kind of a quick reference, It All Adds Up is our sustainability campus campaign for the community. I encourage you, if you haven't been here before on this website, come here and check it out. It's worth your time. And we're actually getting a revamped website starting tomorrow morning at like 8 a.m. So more to come on that one. The report I really wanted to show you, and I'll send these links after the the meeting tonight is this one here. If you go to this web page, it's facilities energy management website. And on the right-hand side of the navigation here, they have an energy management monthly metrics report that you can access. And when you're in it, you'll be able to see sort of metrics around our three core principles, that reliability, cost effectiveness, and sustainability from a variety of different vantage points. So we look at, loss of service events. We look at how much our emergency generators are being used and how reliable they are when they've been called upon to dispatch. Are they capable of doing so? From a sustainability standpoint, I'm going to jump down a little bit. They track monthly CO2 emissions year on year and look at trends over time, as well as baseline reductions and how effectively we are at reducing that. They look a lot at water consumption. So our energy management group also manages our water utility. They look at normalized weather data to look at campus energy consumption relative to a normalized model. And then this is another one that's kind of worth looking at if you're interested in how the university gets its electricity. They produce a graph now on a monthly basis that shows the split of where our electricity is coming from. How much is generated by the university's cogen, that blue wedge there. How much is through our community solar contracts, how much is through our renewable connect purchases. So they're tracking this on a monthly basis and looking at, where is that electricity supply coming from and how is that sort of shaking out. Let's see. And then a little bit more about, sort of how we're supplying energy and a few other charts that might be of interest, especially to energy wonks and nerds. I know I appreciate these. I'm sure that some of you on the Zoom also do as well. But Jay, you had mentioned the ASHE conference. I wanted to mention that too, so I'm glad you brought it up. I'd encourage you all to attend. The university bought a host institution sponsorship. And so any University of Minnesota employee, student can attend for free. You just have to use that code that Vijay shared earlier. And then the other one that might be of interest to this group is we've been part of a coalition of universities that's organizing a Midwest Climate Summit that'll kick off October 2nd. And it's a series of 5 virtual meetings and 1 student summit, although students are welcome to attend any of the sessions. Really focused on developing a Midwest response to climate change and trying to craft solutions that are unique to the Midwest and demonstrating Midwest leadership. So it's a coalition of universities, some cities, corporate America, and really kind of focused on how do we develop a collaboration across the entire Midwest region to drive forward on issues of climate change and climate adaptation. So I think it's going to be great. The kickoff session features a lot of fantastic speakers in a sort of keynote and then some TED Talk style formats and then a Q&A afterwards. But then the subsequent sessions are going to be much more focused on kind of a speech and then a bunch of working sessions with people actually engaging in dialogue around how do we actually construct solutions and implement solutions for the future. So worth checking out. I'll throw that one in the chat as well and send the link out afterwards so you have access to that too. I think that's it. I should be done and let you all talk and ask any other follow-up questions you might have.
I actually had a question about one of the slides from earlier when you were talking about how when the university constructs a new building, there is kind of like a code that they follow that the state puts out for sustainability standards. So I was just curious if those like building codes, are those the standard for any new building that's like built in the state, or are those more like optional guidelines that you can follow if you want to reach this like standard of sustainability?
Great question. Yeah, so they are applicable for any new building built in the state that's funded by the state. So any building that gets what are called general obligation bond funds are subject to the sustainability standard. Most university buildings are, although not all, but we generally apply that standard to all our buildings, regardless of whether they got the funds or not. So yeah, so you would see it on like state projects that the state Department of Admin or the Department of Transportation does, or Minnesota State College and Universities, if they're building something, they'll use the standards. We use the standards. But if you went to a commercial development in downtown Minneapolis, they probably wouldn't. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, and if you're interested, I can send a link out to that afterwards too. The standards are they're continually evolving. I would say that some of them are really straightforward, and some of them might seem a little obtuse and kind of technical, wonky, but they're generally. I mean, what I would say is they generally, if you're familiar with leadership in energy and environmental design, they are comparable to LEED in some ways, but not a one-for-one.
All right, well, if there's no more questions, then I guess we can stick around if anyone has any more questions.
I usually get questions about renewables. I'm surprised I didn't get any about that.
Hey, BJ, this is Doug.
Yep.
One thing I just wanted to share with you guys, Shane is nice enough also to be part of the MRES and National Solar Tour. And so he's going to be part of that. So people, you know, anyone on this call or any of your students involved can go to the MRES website, and which is mnrenewables.org, and check on that. And there'll be buildings there that are part of the Minnesota group, which is about 30 different, you know, homes and businesses and now the university stuff. But then also it'll tie into national. So you'll be able to look at anything across the nation. And then the other thing I wanted to do, and I'll send it to you tomorrow, is that MNSEA, the Minnesota Solar Energy Industry Association, has got a conference coming up in October. And there's they're offering a major discount for students. And so I'll send that over to you, and you can share it with others that might be interested in attending that. And that is really fantastic because it's exactly everything that's going on in Minnesota and the upper Midwest, and many, many good speakers. So should be of interest to some people.
Yeah, absolutely, Doug. Thanks for sharing all of that. I'll definitely have that on our website and to go out in our newsletter as well.
All right, thanks.
Yep, thank you. So if there's no other questions, then we can go ahead and conclude today's meeting. Thank you, Shane, for speaking with us. Really enjoyed it. And if people have more questions, where can they reach you?
That's a good question. So when I send out the slide deck, I'll include my contact slide in there, and then it'll also include links to our social media handles as well.
Perfect. All right, if there's no other questions, then yeah, thanks everyone. I will stick around if anyone has anything that they want to ask about what Energy Club's doing for the rest of the semester. But yeah, that's all I got. Thanks everyone for coming tonight.
Thanks for the invite.